So our next speaker is Dr. Raymond Cloyd from K-State. Dr. Cloyd is professor and extension specialist in horticultural entomology, integrated pest management. Dr. Cloyd is the extension specialist in horticultural and ornamental entomology for the state of Kansas. Dr. Cloyd has published over 70 scientific refereed publications in over 400 trade journals on topics related to pest management. In addition, he has authored or co-authored books on pest and diseases of herbaceous perennials, IPM for gardeners, plant protection, insect and mite pests, so many more books. So he has written quite a few books. Book chapters, manuals, pocket guides, many extension-related publications. Now, Dr. Cloyd is a frequent speaker at state, national, and international conferences and seminars. Dr. Cloyd has a Bachelor of Science degree in Ornamental Horticulture, California Polytech State University, California, and a minor of Science degree in Plant Protection, Pest Management, again from the same school. And he has a Master's in Entomology from Purdue University, and a doctorate and a PhD in Entomology as well from Purdue. Dr. Cloyd has won several awards. The most recent notable awards are the American Society for Horticultural Sciences Outstanding Extension Educator Award, which he won in 2012. Society of American Florists, Alex Laurie Award for Research and Extension, 2011. Entomological Society of America, North Central Branch Award of Excellence in Integrated Pest Management, 2010. And today, Dr. Cloyd will discuss impact of invasive species on horticultural cropping systems. Dr. Cloyd, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Lekha. Can you all hear me in the back? Good. How about the front? Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, and that's always insects. And particular topic today will be invasive species. Now, I do have a handout. I don't know if I made enough because of budget cuts. Maybe you can share. And also, there's an evaluation form. I thought I'd try this. If this is the worst presentation you ever heard, there's a garbage can in the back. The good ones can come up here in the front, but because I take those very seriously to make sure I'm getting the education across. So what I'm going to talk about today is the impact of invasive species on horticultural cropping systems. So what you can expect today is this. Brief introduction, talk about invasive insects, talk about characteristics of invasive species, how we deal with them or do not deal with them, and then questions and discussion. What is an invasive species? Do you know the primary invasive species is? Us! We are not native of the United States. We push the Indians over and over and over and over. But is anybody making an effort to get rid of us? No. Pardon? ISIS. Okay. That's another topic, by the way. But anyway, what is an invasive species? I mean, look in the mirror, people. We're the first invasive species out there. But what is an invasive species? An invasive species is, the definition is introduced or non-indigenous, exotic, or native species adversely affects economically, environmentally, ecologically, habitats and regions they invade. That is pretty much sort of the textbook definition of what invasive species are. I'm going to give you some examples of invasive species. These are non-insect related. Plants, kudzu, the weed that's covering the south, Melaleuca flora, purple loosestrife, leafy spurge. What about animals? Starlings. Do you know starlings were actually introduced in the United States on purpose? Does anybody know why? Because they wanted to bring all the birds that were in William Shakespeare's book. And so there's starlings. Now there are over 220,000 starlings in the United States. And starlings are our pests, basically. Zebra mussels. Zebra mussels are clogging the Great Lakes. We have them also in Milford Lake in Junction City, Manhattan. Massive problem. Asian carp. These are the fish that jump up and get in your boat as they're going by, so you don't have to fish anymore. Just ride your boat, and the fish jump into it, basically. And a really cool one is the Burmese python. In Florida, there's about over 50,000 Burmese pythons down in the Everglades and stuff. And they'll eat alligators. and eat little kids and pets and stuff like that. So again, this is examples of these are exotics from another country. What about diseases? We have the Dutch elm disease, of course, which wiped out almost all the American elms in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. American chestnut blight did the same thing for the chestnuts. Sudden oak death is another one. And of course, a recent one is the boxwood blight that is pretty much hammering ornamental boxwoods. This is something we've been dealing with in the last 5 years. These are all introduced into the United States from another country. Let's talk about the two types of insect pest. Endemics are those that are commonly native to an area or have been established for a long time, years, and are widely distributed. Okay? Exotic pests have been inadvertently or accidentally, sometimes on purpose, and I know some of my colleagues have done this, into the U.S. from another country, and what they do, they invade these new ecosystems without their complex of natural enemies. And that is the reason why many of our current insect pests, once they're introduced, actually just take off, because they do not have the complex or plethora of natural enemies that regulate their populations in the native country. So they have the potential to migrate both spatially and temporally within a short period of time because of that. They just don't have the natural enemies, and our own native natural enemies, it takes a long time for them to finally determine this is a good food source and we maybe should eat it. But that could take 5, 10 to 20 years to happen, okay? So those of you that geographically challenged, this is the United States, and there's Kansas, right in the middle. And so what happens is we are no longer, there's no longer isolationism. We are globalized. You can get in a plane in Kansas City, Missouri at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you can be in Europe 8 hours and Africa in about 24 hours. Everything is globalized. There's no isolationist anymore. And that allows for a free-for-all of many of these species that are not native to the United States. So the phases of invasion are this. There's the arrival of the invasive species, then they become established, then they integrate with the current native populations, and then they spread. We call that arrive, survive, and thrive. That's our mantra for that. So that basically what happens. These are what we call the 4 phases of invasion. Now, Vinette and Carey are actually at the University of, I believe, Berkeley, one of the UC campuses. They've done a lot with invasive species, and they came up with this quote saying, invasive species that maintain high rates of growth, maturation, reproduction over a wide range of environmental conditions are more likely to become established once introduced into a habitat. Okay, and this was done, said in 1998 in their publication, Invasive Biology, Rethinking Our Response to Alien Species, coming out of the journal California Agriculture. And of course, California, I'm originally from California, there's usually a new insect pest every month that comes into California, Hawaii, and Florida, mainly because those are ports of entry, okay? And the climates are really conducive for the establishment and survival of many of these insect and mite invasive species. Approximately 5,000 of the arthropods, insects and mite species, have been introduced in the United States. In fact, most of our current pests are invasive species. Japanese beetle in 1960, and I'll go over this. Almost 90% of the insect and mite pests we deal with in the United States have come from another country. They're exotic, okay? So homeland security does not pertain to arthropods. What is it, the TLC or TS? TSP, thank you. Or what's the other, TSA? Yes, TSA. That doesn't matter. Does anybody know does anybody work for the TSA or the government? Do you know what TSA stands for, I've been told? It's thousands standing around. That's just somebody told me, basically. Don't mean to offend anybody, but that's what somebody told me. He's a pilot, basically. Told me that. So, what are the costs of this? It costs about $137 billion a year. $137 billion a year to deal with invasive or non-indigenous species. And that number keeps going up. Okay, $137 billion. That's a lot. That's a chunk of change. okay, right there. The economic cost. There's direct cost and the management cost. The direct cost, production loss in agriculture, horticulture, and forestry. And then there's the cost for management. That is control, eradication if it's possible. Does anybody know what organism we actually eradicated off the planet? Technically eradicated off the planet. Anybody know? God, I have a $100 check here from Lekha to get this right answer. Smallpox. Smallpox is the only organism that we've now there are samples in formerly Soviet Union, and of course the CDC has them in Atlanta, but it's the only organism we've been able to actually, quote, eradicate. We've never been able to eradicate any other organism, maybe the screwworm fly in the Curacao area, but also the management of these. The management is also critical, and there's a cost associated with that. I love this graph. Let me explain what we're talking about here. On the y-axis is the area infested, the x-axis is time, and then we have control cost over here. The introduction of the invasive species, we have what we call the detection. This is where prevention or eradication is simple or cost-effective. Okay. As time goes by and the area becomes more infested, eradication becomes less feasible until we get to this point where public awareness typically begins and we cannot eradicate the pest. It's too late at that point. It is established, and we can't do anything about it. And then eventually we get to this point where it's local control and management only. Okay? I love this image because it really points out very succinctly what's involved when an invasive species gets here, by the time we detect it, by the time the public is aware of it, and the limitations of how to deal with it. Okay? That's what's involved here. This is a listing, and it's not an exhaustive listing of the common invasive insects we've had over many years. The emerald ash borer came in I'll talk more about emerald ash borer. Gypsy moth, Japanese beetle came in 1916. Fire ants, Formosan termite, Africanized honeybees. You can read the list, and you can see a lot of them come from China or, yes ma'am?
What's the last one?
Oh, West Nile virus. That's it. The West Nile virus is vectored by a mosquito, Culex pipiens. West Nile, this is a virus transmitted by a mosquito, Culex pipiens. And so that was introduced in New York in 1999. The mosquito was. And the mosquito is the vector of the virus, just like certain mosquitoes will vector yellow fever and some malaria. This is the first time this one ever was found in the United States. Okay? And the mosquito was also not native to the United States. Some of them have been, but not this virus. Okay? But it is associated with an insect, so that is why I bring it up. Good question. So you can see Asian lady beetle, a lot of them. Here's the other part. Brown Monterey stink bug, brought in 1998. We do not have it officially in Kansas, we understand it, but we'll get it eventually. Spotted winged Drosophila, I'll talk more about that. Came in, we have it in Kansas. We detected it last year in Wichita and Topeka. European fire ant, just a whole slew of these organisms. And you see that most of them come from Asia. And that's somebody, I gave this talk several years ago, and they said, why don't you just call this the Asian invasion? I mean, it's basically, you want to be politically correct, but they do come from Europe. One thing that you'll notice is that some of these have been detected early on, and then they come back. That is common for some of these. Let's go back to one. For example, the Asian ladybird beetle. You've all seen that, haven't you? The one that comes in your home in the fall and gets in the corners of the home where it's nice and warm. That was actually found in introduced in 1916, and then it was disappeared. And then it came back in 78 through 82, and now it's established through most of the United States, basically. So sometimes you get these introductions, and then you won't see the insect after that. And then they'll be reintroduced again, okay? So obviously, many of the insect pests we deal with are not endemic. They're exotic, basically, and we have to deal with them. So what are some of the characteristics of these insect invaders? Well, first of all, they are small. They're hard to detect in general. They have high reproductive potential. That is, the females can produce a lot of offspring. They have superior colonizing ability. They can really take over an area within a very short period of time. And the number 4 is the big one. No natural enemies introduced in country of origin, region. That allows them to escape regulation and take over areas within a short period of time. Sleeper species. The emerald ash borer is a sleeper species. That is, you don't start seeing them until they build up to certain densities. And then they become more noticeable, and we call that sleeper species. Okay? So these are just some of the general characteristics of these invasive species. Some other common traits that occur, they have extensive growth rates, rapid reproduction, high dispersal ability, that is, they can fly. People tell me the emerald ash borer does not fly very well. No, it flies. It can fly 4 miles in an hour. It has good dispersal abilities. They can fly quite well, especially when there's strong air currents. Okay, it can move. It has what we call phenotypic plasticity. That is, they can alter their growth form based on the current conditions. They tolerate a wide range of environmental conditions. Most of them are generalist. That is, they have the ability to feed on a wide range of hosts, food types. Some of them are associated with humans, such as like mosquitoes, like the West Nile virus, which was also associated with birds, and then prior successful invasions. Like I showed you before, some of these have been found early on in the country, and then they're taken care of, or there's attempts to eradicate them, and then they're gone, and then they reappear again, mostly because of globalization. Yes, ma'am?
Is this a time to ask a question?
Oh, absolutely.
The ceiling wasp, the wasp that hibernate in or live in a ceiling in a home, is that an invasive species, or is that something we've always had?
Let me rephrase your question so everybody can hear it. The ceiling wasp that is in your home, is that an invasive species or not? It really depends. The Polistes wasp, most of them are native to the United States. So it's not an invasive species as far as I know of, no. Okay. Are there any questions about that? Okay, so these are some of the common characteristics of invasive insects. Some other factors to be aware of: invasions are likely to succeed in highly disturbed or mild climates. That is because where they came from, either the tropics or China. Invasive insect populations may remain low at densities for years or decades before being detected. That's another example of the sleeper species phenomenon. Not all introductions of invasive species will have adverse effects. The effects may not be associated with disturbance to a region, basically because of climate factors. The climate in certain areas will restrict the movement, both spatially and temporally, of many of these invasive species. Now, people talk about this thing called climate change or global warming or climate destabilization. If that does exist, then that will allow some of these species to move up or spread out spatially from the original epicenter or origin areas that they were introduced. An increase in human mobility will enhance the potential for unintentional or deliberate introduction of invasive insects. Okay? So the bottom line is, it is not the end of the world when these things come in. We just have to understand a little bit of the biology and some of the demographics and some of the other factors associated with these when they come in. What are the problems? Well, the first one is you can get a reduction in yields and increased plant mortality. We've already suffered that with a number of invasive species, insects that are coming into the United States. Number two is they can alter the ecological community. They can outcompete and displace native species, and I'll give you 2 examples of that as we go along. They can also change the flora and fauna of understory habitats. Those are primarily the leaf-chewing insects, such as gypsy moth and emerald ash borer. They can interbreed with the native species. We call it genetic pollution, and you erode the genetic integrity or you reduce diversity. Okay? And we always talk about genetic diversity as a means of warding off problems with invasive species. Number 4 is public health issues. This goes back to mosquitoes primarily. And number 5 is that this can result in the extinction of native species via competitive exclusion, niche displacement, or they hybridize with similar native species. So this is both the ecological and the environmental impact of the introduction of invasive species. You had a question, ma'am? No, I'm sorry. Oh, you're just rolling up your sleeves? Yeah. Okay, that's all right. You're getting ready for combat. I can see. So this is just really the key things what we really need to be cognizant about when an invasive species comes in to an area. Now, for example, in California, where I'm from, the Argentine ant, which is a non-native species, has already displaced many of the native ant species. Okay? The Argentine ant is a very problematic ant because it has multiple queens, polygynous, and it is very aggressive. It has multiple satellite colonies, and it can just basically take over an area within a short period of time. Okay? So it's displacing the native ant species. We've also seen that the Asian ladybird beetle has displaced in certain areas the native hippodemic convergence ladybird beetles. Okay? The other thing about Asian ladybird beetle, it has been shown to vector transmit certain diseases in the feces. So this is another item I'll talk about, is the relationship with diseases that some of these invasive insects can transmit. Here's an example of what gypsy moth. The gypsy moth, there's the adult right there. The female cannot fly because she's so full of eggs. She's laying her batch of eggs. They're brown. It's the larval stage here. The larvae are caterpillars. They're half blue, half red, and they're eating machines. They can eat 1 square foot of leaf area within an hour, and this is what they can do to a forest area. Now, what that will do then is allow more sunlight to come through, and it changes the flora and fauna of the understory. So you'll get a difference in plant types. You'll get a difference in insects. You'll get a difference in animals in that area. Now, the fortunate thing was there was a nudist colony right there, so they didn't reach that far. So that was pretty good for them. They were concerned about helicopters going over the nudist colony, but they never reached that far. But, you know, this is pretty substantial, what can happen in these areas. And it does change the dynamics of the flora and fauna in those forest systems. Here's another example of gypsy moth. What gypsy moth, just after lunch, as gypsy moth feeds, it gives off a lot of poop or frass. And what the frass does, it drops down on these benches, and really that's not attractive for sitting down, is it? So economically, this impacts tourism. Because tourists are not going to come there and have a lunch, sit there under all that frass and the gypsy moth. Has anybody been in Michigan where the gypsy moth are feeding and you can actually hear them feeding and all the frass dropping down? It's like it's raining. It's like it's raining. It is an amazing experience. If it's on your bucket list, make that #1 priority, basically, is to go see gypsy moth feeding in the summer and all the frass raining down on you and causing these types of problems. So this is a big economic problem. How do these things get moved around? You know, how do they get moved around from one location to the next? Well, the big one is moving firewood. This is a big one for beetles, like the emerald ash borer, the Asian longhorn beetle that came into Chicago when I was there in the late 90s, is people going to Michigan, getting ash firewood, going to Salina, Manhattan, Kansas City, leaving it outside, and then the beetles come out and you have an infestation, in this case of, say, emerald ash borer. So the movement of firewood, this is what we see now, is burn it where we buy it. The movement of firewood is the primary means of which these insects spread. Okay? And it's really interesting, when you track the movement of emerald ash borer, it really tracks highways, freeways, going both east and west and north and south. So that's why we say, if you're going to use firewood, burn it where you've got it. Don't move it around after that. Pallets. Look at this. This is one of the ports of call, and of course, this is how several insects were introduced, primarily the Asian longhorn beetle, is they get in these pallets as larvae, they sit there, and then when they're sitting in these facilities, they come out as an adult. Okay? So pallets is another one. Ports of entry. You know, I'm originally from California, so we have Mexico, the border, people coming back and forth from Mexico. Oregon, they have these stations still where they try to keep Californians from coming in, but they have these, and Arizona has a border protection station down there for checking for fruit. But this is another reason, another way they can get in. I took a cruise to the Panama Canal several years ago, and has anybody been to the Panama Canal? If you haven't sat there and watched what happens, it is the most amazing things. Boats are sitting on both sides of the Atlantic and the Pacific waiting to go through. These are what they call mules, and they just take these ships. This one's going into the Pacific, and this is from China, and look at all those cargo bays. And when we were sitting there, there were 15. There were 15 on the Pacific side and several on the Atlantic, just ready to go through the Panama Canal. Okay, so again, globalization. There is no isolationism or barriers. Easy for these organisms to move from one country to the next. And here we have the ports of entry. You know, whether it be Miami, which is the hot spot. Miami is the #1 port of call where most of the invasions come in because of all the traffic that comes in there from South America, Central America, and parts of Europe. And then hurricanes and tropical storms. You know, this is where we think some insects we've gotten before are being moved around in these weather systems. Okay? So these are the mechanisms by which these insects and mites, which I'm talking about, can be moved around from one location to another. Okay? So globalization, what goes around comes around. Okay? There are no barriers anymore. Is that right, Kurt?
Yes, sir.
Right, no barriers at all. Let's talk about, I'm going to give you some examples of some recent insect pest invasive species. The first one is the brown Monterey stink bug. We don't have it in Kansas yet. It is in Missouri, right, Colin? Yes. Yeah, Missouri, Nebraska. This insect has changed the dynamics of growing fruit in the eastern part of the country where it was detected in 1996. Growers, before this insect came in, were using biological control and we call IPM practices. As soon as this insect came in, it feeds on all sorts of fruit, both the nymphs and the adults. Now growers have to spray routinely to keep damage from happening. Okay? So this insect has changed the dynamics of plant protection. In addition, this insect, like the Asian ladybird beetles, comes into the homes in wintertime. So it's a nuisance pest. Okay? So it's an agricultural pest because it feeds on fruits primarily, and then it comes into the home and becomes a nuisance pest. So this is a serious invasive species. I was in Pittsburgh many years ago and got pictures of the nymphs feeding on paulownia trees, which they tend to like, but this is a substantial pest. Asian ladybird beetle is still around. People have gotten used to it. It does feed on grapes, feed on fruit trees, things like that. But the more problematic is a nuisance pest. It comes into homes, gets into the corners on the south side, and resides there. They don't transmit a disease. They do bite you, and people don't like them walking over you. How many have seen these in your homes? What do you do about them? Pardon? Yeah, they die in the light. How many vacuum?
I find big mats up underneath the overhangs of houses where you pull out these. There's just the Sopcich.
Yeah.
Just thousands of them.
Right, in the wintertime, right? Or early spring. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing is, in China, where they're from, they go to cliffs to overwinter. Well, in the Midwest, we don't have many cliffs, so a house is the next best thing. And so what they do is they sit there, and in the spring, you'll start noticing getting active because they've used up all the metabolites and food sources during the wintertime. But what's really interesting is some studies have been done is ever since this insect was introduced, houses are a lot cleaner because people are doing more vacuuming. So there is a benefit of these guys, hygiene, So don't knock them. They're actually helping people out. Is it true if they're attracted to white? Yes, it is. They are on a white building. They'll congregate, and then they get a suntan, and then they move into the house. Okay. What they're doing there is they're building up the metabolism and getting ready to go inside, and that's when all their food that's stored inside of them will be used during the wintertime. Yeah, and some people, what can you do? Well, you can spray a pyrethroid insecticide on that side, and that will repel them away. Of course, the best thing is cracks and crevices, caulk them. Just seal them out, and that'll prevent them from coming in. Okay? The other thing about this pest is studies have shown that the adults will transmit certain diseases in their feces, certain fungi, and that could be very problematic. This is a close-up of the smaller European elm bark beetle. This is the vector of Dutch elm disease, or one of the two. This is not life-size. It's close-up, by the way. Let you know that. But the issue I want to point out is that some of these invasive species come in with their fungi. They're vectors of diseases. And this is the first one. Another one is the one that's killing the red bays in Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas. It's an ambrosia beetle that vectors a disease that is killing the red bays. So the other problem we run into is some of these invasive species are associated with a disease which is actually more detrimental to the actual beetle. Here's one example. This is the vector of the Dutch elm disease. This is what the tree looks like when it's got Dutch elm disease in it. You get this reddening of the bark. Here are the maternal galleries caused by the adults, and these are the larvae inside these galleries. Okay? So the fungus, Ophiostomia, which is the genus, follows this beetle throughout the entire life stages. Okay? Now, here's the big one. We don't have citrus here, but this is a devastating pest. The Asian citrusillid is responsible for vectoring something called citrus greening, and it wipes out. It will wipe out orange groves. Florida and California, primarily the states that provide most of the orange and citrus, are very concerned about this. And they're trying to find ways, there's a lot of money going into it to try to find ways to deal with this insect. It's a psyllid, and it vectors this thing called citrus greening, which causes the foliage to look like this, and then eventually the entire tree dies out. Okay? That's a problem. Now, the emerald ash borer. Is it time to kiss your ash goodbye? No. The emerald ash borer we're lucky, it's not a vector of any disease that we know about right now. But let me just talk about it for a little bit. This is the map this is in 2006. It was originally found in Detroit area, also Canada. So there's the epicenter right there. I was in Illinois when we found in Kane County, but there is the original epicenter or distribution. Now, this is what we're looking at right now in 2014. It's now in 22 states, and just yesterday I got an email, it's in Louisiana. So it's in Louisiana now, that far south. But you can see, those of you that don't know, there's Kansas, there's Missouri. There are 3 counties in Kansas, Leavenworth, Wyandotte, Johnson, that are quarantined or found the emerald ash borer, and then Boulder, Colorado had it last year. So it's moving. And to me, the game is over. I mean, there's no way we're going to eradicate it, but it's just there. So the theory now is, what do we do about it? Well, what we do about it is we just accept it. It's just another wood-boring insect that we deal with that attacks our ash trees, just like lilac borer does. Okay? Nothing new, just another insect we got to deal with. And we can deal with it. This one, though, is a major concern. The spotted-winged Drosophila suzuki, is from Japan, Korea, and we detected it in Kansas last year above Topeka and right above Wichita. This insect attacks a lot of fruit trees, berry crops, and it is devastating. Why? Because the female, with her sharpened serrate ovipositor, injects the eggs into the fruit, and the larvae just develop in there. And there's not a lot we can do. The only thing we have right now is spraying before the females lay eggs. And that's pretty much it. I developed with Sherry Copeland an extension fact sheet last year. It's online. But right now, this is a big concern because of the potential impact on fruit trees, especially organic fruit tree producers, because they don't have very many options for spraying. So we've been working with the organic growers in Kansas about what they can do to alleviate problems with this pest. Right now we're looking at sanitation, harvesting early, things like that to minimize any potential economic damage from spotted-winged Drosophila. Okay? So again, these are concerns. Now in 2013, this comes from a newspaper article I read from USA Today. South Carolina, Charleston. Customs agents have discovered a tick species at the port that has not been detected before in the U.S. The tick was found in a shipment of work gloves from Pakistan, which has been sent back. Now, they did send back, I'm trying to figure out, did they send back the tick or the work gloves? So we're trying to, but they did send it back. But see, this is what shows up. I mean, at these ports of call, work gloves from Pakistan has a tick that we've never seen in the United States. And last year, Time Magazine devoted an entire article, 18 to 26 pages there, on invasive species. And if you can download it, read it, it's very good. I think they did a pretty fine job of talking about the economic costs and how we're homogenizing the planet due to invasive species. What can we do, or is it too late? Anytime? The key to minimizing this is prevention. But can the inspectors, Kurt, can you guys inspect all these cargo bays? No. Okay. And every day they're bringing more in. It just is, it's a physical impossibility to do this. Here's where I brought up two issues at once. Okay. First of all, will the introduction of invasive species lead to increased insecticide use? The neonicotinoid insecticides, how many know what neonicotinoid insecticides are, the systemics? Neonicotinoids are used a lot on many invasive species, primarily emerald ash borer and hemlock woolly diligent. Okay? But what about the issue of neonicotinoids in pollinators right now? I think we have a conflict here. This is going to be an issue that we have to deal with. Okay? The neonicotinoids are very good use for invasive species. However, now they're being scrutinized in the issue with the pollinators. There's a major conflict there. Okay? Are there any benefits in invasive insects? Can anybody think of any? No, job security. That's it. And job security basically overall. Here's I'll get those invasive species. Some vertebrates are trying to take action right there overall. And here's another thing. Continued introductions of invasive species may lead to planetary homogenization. And I'm with stupid. And so I just thought I'd put that up there basically. That means that everything becomes the same. I mean, emerald ash borer is everywhere. These insects are spread throughout the entire planet. That's what I mean. Good question, ma'am. If you want more information, there's some websites here from the Global Invasive Species Initiative. There are the websites there. Those of you have a handout. I thank you for your attention. I hope you all learned something. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to address them. Thank you very much. Before any questions, I will say there's a book called Biological Invasions by David Pimentel. It's now in the 2nd edition. Very good book. I'll have it up there. It's my copy, but you can get it out Amazon.com or CRC Press. And you want to read about the economic environmental cost of alien plant, animal, and microbe species. This is a book I would probably get. It is 11 months till Christmas. You might want to put a bug in somebody's ear and get this as a Christmas present. Excuse me? His name is David Pimentel, Pimentel. He's from Cornell University. Any time for questions?
Any questions for Dr. Cloyd? Thank you.
Thank you very much. You guys are great on.